At the end of our last story, Peter had broken out of Toya Harada's Harbinger Foundation and escaped to find that they were not helping his friend Joe, but instead the Foundation fed Joe's addictions and Peter ended up finding Joe dead. As the Foundation attempted to close in on Peter though, he lashed out and he leveled the entire building. The next day, Chris found herself standing in front of that destroyed building. Her and Joe shared something most people would never understand: the history with Peter Stanchek. Right now, she didn't know whether Joe was alive or dead, but something feels off. Chris sees a strange woman for a second and then everything changes. The crowd, the cars, and as she looks back at her phone, she sees that she's lost 3 minutes of time. Somehow, this is Peter's fault, and even walking home, there are people that aren't normally there, watching. Later that night, while looking out her window at the destroyed home where Peter made his stand, a voice from above tells Chris, "Hi." Faith flies through the window and tells Chris, "I'm Zephyr, and I'm a superhero. I totally save lives and stuff. My real name is Faith though, don't tell anyone, it's a secret identity." Faith says Peter sent her and he needs her. He's hurt real bad. Chris asks exactly where is he, and Faith says she can fly her there. "But I need you to wear this tinfoil hat first. Harada's trying to track us down and Peter isn't in any kind of a shape to block him, so for now, I made these." Once they get outside, Faith picks up Chris, and even though she can't fly them there, they can kinda float over things until they reach a closed down post office, and Faith says, "This is totally our hideout." Inside, Peter lays beaten and broken, and Chris asks, "Why am I even here? How much more can he bone my life?" Peter struggles to get up, stating, "I asked you to come here, so you can kill me. It would be my gift to you. I'm too dangerous to live." She tells him to shut up. That would be like giving him what he wants. But she does have one question. Is Joe really dead? Peter starts to ask, "How did you know?" And Chris gets up, kicking the chair over, asking if he was the one who did it. Did he do it with his crazy powers? Peter explains, "No, it wasn't me. It was Toya Harada. They were supposed to treat Joe, but they lied to me." Chris then asks, "What about earlier when I seemed to have lost 3 minutes? What about those people who have been following me?" Peter explains that the woman that she saw was from the Harbinger Foundation to see if she knew where Peter may be, and that the people watching are from Project Rising Spirit, seeing if Peter would contact her. Chris begins to leave, stating that she should just tell them where he's at. It would be so much easier. And deep down, she knows that she should go home. But she's scared, so maybe she'll just stay a little longer? The sun then begins to come up, and Faith and Chris sit on the roof of the post office, and Chris asks if she thinks that Peter is a good person. Faith tells her, "Totally, he's the best. He's the one who made it so that I could fly. But it seems like he has a lot of guilt about what happened between you two, Chris." Chris asks, "He was the one that made you fly?" And Faith tells her, "Yes. If it wasn't for him, I would just be another unloved fat girl, but he made it so that I was something special, something amazing." Chris then heads back inside, telling Peter, "I want something from you. I want you to rob a bank." Peter says that if she's planning on taking the money for herself, just leave Faith out of it, but Chris tells him, "Stop trying to play the hero, it doesn't suit you very well." So the three of them leave, and using Peter's abilities, they rob a bank. Afterwards, Chris heads back home and sees the same woman who made her lose those 3 minutes. Chris shouts, "Whoa, wait! You want Peter? He'll be at my house tonight." She then runs off, stating, "Please, leave me alone. I want my life back." Later that night, Chris's parents come home and they find a note stating that she's in trouble, and she needs them to get her out of Motel 6. She's so scared. After Chris's parents leave to go get her, Toya and his men appear to capture Peter, and as Toya flies in, he hears a voice welcoming him to their home. Toya looks up and sees a laptop set up with a web camera and Chris on the screen. She says that she's recording him, so if anything happens to her parents, she'll release this video. Toya starts to tell her that she cannot imagine how far out of the safety zone she is right now. And then Toya gets word that the PRS shock troops are surrounding the home. Over in the Motel 6, Chris's parents find her room and they find a camcorder with words, "Play me," on them. They press play and sit at the foot of the bed, and when the TV lights up, Chris is on the screen. She says that she knows that this is sudden, but she's gonna be gone for a while. There's a bag on the bed with money that is theirs now. Just know that she loves them and she's doing this for everyone's safety. Back at the post office, Chris tells Peter if he can give powers to others, he's going to need to find more people to help. Over at Chris's home, the PRS soldiers outside watch as the house gets blown to pieces, but soon the soldiers stop, and then the soldiers begin to shatter. Out of the fire, Toya floats over, stating that Chris Hathaway has set them up. Fascinating. A week later, at the Harada Global Conglomerate's building, Toya sits on a phone call asking why he was unaware of the PRS's movements. He doesn't want to hear excuses. He just needs them to know that now is not the time for his contacts to become unreliable. Toya ends his call as Ingrid appears, telling him that she has some bad news. Last night, Peter followed Rachel Hobson to one of their recruitment safe houses and ambushed her and performed an invasive extraction on her mind. Rachel is being flown back now, but she's not well. There also seems to be a missing box of Harbinger uniforms for what it's worth. A couple of hours later, Rachel is flown in and Ingrid takes Toya to see her, but explains that things might be different. Peter implanted psychic impressions of Joseph Irons into her mind. As they enter her mind, Ingrid says that she's sorry for her weakness and she will not be following them inside. She is still raw from her exposure to Peter. Toya tells her that's fine, he won't be long. As he walks through her mind, he starts to see images of Joe directing him to find Rachel. Once he does, Toya finds Rachel in a straitjacket in her own mind, stating, "Peter, he went inside my mind." Toya tells her to calm herself. He needs to take her back to what happened so we can see. Toya places his hands on Rachel's head and she begins to tell him the list of potential latents, everyone they were monitoring. Peter knows, but he dug deeper. He knows about the monk. Toya begins to watch through Rachel's eyes as Peter began to dig inside of her head. And he sees Peter telling her that they knew all along they were going to kill Joe. She just pretended to be his friend. She will remember everything that he knew about Joe for the rest of her life. And that's when Rachel screams out, "No more! Get out of my head!" And Toya says that he now knows what Peter wants to do. He's looking to activate the other psiots. Over in New Orleans, a girl walks down the side of the road while someone rides behind her calling out to her. She can't hear him because of her headphones, but the man gets out of the car, grabbing her, shouting, if she can't hear him when he's calling her, what did he say about leaving the apartment without letting him know? The girl tries to state that she told him she had work, but the man slaps her, telling her not to talk back. The man then begins to leave, stating that he needs her to make some money tonight, shaking her stuff. Rent's due. The girl's name is Charlene, and she doesn't like to be seen like this. She prefers to be seen as the performer Flamingo. A year ago, Charlene had a fascination with fire, and as she grew, so did that fascination. As Charlene sits with another performer, she notices Peter and his group scoping her out, so maybe she should go try and make some money. Charlene walks to their table asking if they'd like some company, and Faith says, "Oh, you're so pretty." She sits down introducing herself, but Chris starts to make fun of her stage name. So she gets up to leave, and Peter tells her to hold on. We're all just on edge. We never did anything like this before. Peter tells her his name and then tells her her name. Charlene knows that she should deny her actual name, but sees there's something about this guy. And Peter says, let him show her. So he touches her head, and a bouncer appears stating that he seems to be getting too grabby. It's time for him to leave. As he gets pushed out the door, Faith runs back stating, look, I know this is totally weird, but you just gotta meet us outside. Really, I can't stress it enough. Charlene thinks back on her life about how she ended up in this situation. But that touch, maybe she should go see what this is all about. She walks outside to see Peter and Chris bickering about what happened. And once they see Charlene, Peter asks if she'd like to come back to the motel room. Once they get inside of the motel, Faith and Chris wait outside, and Charlene says that she was kind of expecting all three of them. And Peter tells her he thinks that she may have the wrong idea. So he puts his hand on the back of her head like before, and he begins to tap into her mind. And then Charlene shouts, breathing fire throughout the entire room. Peter tells her to take his hand, but Charlene tells him to get away and knocks him outside of the building. The now burnt Charlene walks back to the club, and Huxley asks, where the hell was she? He was waiting. And then he asks what happened to her. As they're driving away, Huxley demands to know who did this. He's gonna beat them with a friggin' hammer, and Charlene leans over telling him, you took my heat away, but I think I may have just gotten it back. He then begins to scream as he bursts into flames, and the fire begins to spread. Faith then begins to float down, asking Charlene if she's okay after the wreck, and she tells him not to worry about it. That was nothing but a freedom fire. The next location that they go to is Georgia, where they find a man named Jake working in an auto shop. Peter walks in and he searches through his brain, discovering where his brother is located, and then he walks over to that trailer. As Peter walks into the trailer, he finds John Torkelson crippled laying in the bed. And he asks him, are you crippled? John shouts at him, what do you think? I got toothpicks for legs? Peter tells him he's not sure what he can do, but whatever it is, it's gonna be better than this. Meanwhile, Faith is outside of the trailer and she hears the helicopters on their way. She tries to duck into the treetops, but suddenly she doesn't feel so good and can't fly. Then, over at the auto body shop, Charlene and Chris begin to feel sick themselves, and soon the helicopters shout that they're releasing synaptic bombs. Back inside of the trailer where Peter is trying to unlock John's abilities, he notices something is going on. These phased electromagnetic pulses. Project Rising Spirit is here. Back out front though, Charlene begins to lose control of her power and she begins to burst into flames, and Peter flies out grabbing Chris. Moments later, John comes bursting out of the trailer, but not as the frail boy that he was, but as a larger, more ripped man. He's still the same boy inside, but now he can protect himself. He jumps from the ground onto the roof of the shop, and then he jumps up to one of the helicopters, punching through it. The other helicopters begin to fire at John, but then they begin to fall from the sky. Charlene tries to take cover by a nearby car, but the explosion from the helicopter traps her within the car. The other two helicopters begin firing down onto the ground, and Peter tells everyone that they need to make a run for it, but they have to do it organized. Everyone will run in different directions to split their forces, and he will find them when everything is safe. Once everyone begins to run for it, Peter begins to think to himself that he can stop them, and he looks up towards the helicopters, and that's what he sees him. Tull. Peter shouts for Tull, jumping towards his helicopter, but just as he goes to hit him, he passes through him. Tull tells him welcome. He's a hologram, and this was his trap. And a second later, darts begin to fire, covering Peter up in them. Back on the ground, the helicopters land and the men jump out, surrounding everyone except Faith. With Faith about a mile away, the soldiers never saw where she fell. She begins to pick herself back up and she begins to walk towards a car that they parked out there. She tells herself that she looks ridiculous. She's wearing dishwashing gloves for Zeus' sake. She opens up the trunk of the car and knows that Peter and Chris told her to leave them behind, but these uniforms are just so pretty. The fabric is some sort of super crazy villain stuff, but it's really cool. It might seem stupid, but right now, if she's gonna go fight with everyone, she needs a confidence boost. And if she's gonna go pro with this whole superpower thing, then she needs to look the part. After changing into one of the uniforms, Faith states that this is the only extra large that she found, and white isn't really great for camouflage. But white is what the good guys wear. As the night falls, Faith begins to sneak up to the garage, and Tull reports that they managed to capture everyone alive, all but the fat girl who probably ditched the group back in New Orleans. Inside of the garage, Chris tells Tull that she just figured things out. He works for Toya Harada and he doesn't even know it. How is it that he knew where to find them? And just how is it that he was so underprepared that one night, but now he's overprepared? In case you forgot who Tull is the individual who was chasing Peter at the beginning of this entire arc in the first Harbinger video. Go check that out. Tull tells her that he's afraid that he has no memory and he is not equipped to play her game. So once Tull checks on Peter, Faith sneaks into the trailer where Peter's being held and begins to rip all of the plugs off of him. Peter starts to gasp for air and he begins to cough, and Faith tells him, "Shh, we're on the DL." Through his slurs, Peter tells Faith that she's amazing, except from the reality of the situation, Faith sees it as a little different. More helicopters begin to show up and they report that they were at the target location. As the transport helicopters land, Tull tells everyone, let's ship the delinquents out. Back inside the trailer, Peter tells Faith that he is in no condition to fight, he can hardly stand, but Faith says that they really don't have much choice. Faith looks out the windows and sees the transport helicopters closing in and says, they're coming to take everyone, there's no time. Peter tells her to listen. He needs her to strip the wires from the electrodes and put them back on him. They're gonna make them think that he's still under. The guards soon begin to move everyone into the helicopters, leaving Peter on one alone. They then begin to examine him, stating that they're excited that he's alive. They had their yes, he's completely out of it. The helicopters begin to take off with Faith following, but as all of the men stand around watching Peter, the doctor who is examining Peter reaches out and grabs one of the guards' guns. The doctor then begins to shoot everyone, and during the confusion, Peter breaks out of his restraints. The guards have special helmets on protecting them from being possessed, so instead, Peter lobotomizes them. He then looks towards the cockpit and he sees apparently that those helmets are expensive because the pilot didn't seem to get one. With the pilot under his control, giving him control of the plane, the pilot tells him Roger. Peter then has the doctor hold Tull at gunpoint and calls out to Faith so that she can hear him. She asks if everything's okay and Peter tells her, I've got it under control. I'm gonna need you to get into the second helicopter and get it to the ground. There should be a hatch underneath it allowing you to get inside. She flies over to it and makes her way inside, and Peter says he knows that this is scary, but he promises that after this everyone can go their separate ways if they want to. Right now, he needs her to be a part of the team. Can she do it? And Faith tells him, are you effing kidding me? I am this team! And then she bursts through the hatch. All of the guards point their guns, but Chris breaks free, grabbing a rifle and opens fire on everyone, telling Faith to release John. Faith flies over, pulls his helmet off, and John projects himself back to the giant man that he was and begins tearing his way through the guards. Peter watches from the other plane trying to contact her, but he's getting nothing but confusion from her, and then he hears over the radio the guards stating that they have been breached. They are jumping and setting the airship to self-destruct. Peter continues shouting until he finally gets through, telling Faith that they're going to blow up the helicopter. She then tells everyone on board what's going on, but she can't carry everyone. She can't get everyone to safety. This thing's going to explode. Chris looks back at Charlene and asks if she understands the principles of Newton's third law. Charlene asks if she's kidding, and Chris grabs her arm, telling her, you know how thrust works, right? Well, we need to go. Everyone begins to jump from the plane while John watches, and Peter tells his pilots to take themselves out. He then begins to fly out of the back hatch and tells Tull he'll see him in hell. The second helicopter begins to explode, and through the blast, Peter flies through, catching Chris. Charlene tells her to just drop her and ignites her hand, forcing Faith to let go. As she begins to fall, Charlene thinks to herself, thrust, just thrust. Once she gets close enough to the ground, Charlene ignites herself back upwards, but the speed still bounces her across the ground. When she looks up, she yells, suck it, bad guys! Isaac Newton in the house! And then she notices the fire is spreading into the forest. Seconds later, everyone can hear John shouting as he falls to the ground, and as he hits, a giant explosion goes off, and soon there's nothing but smoke. Everyone runs over to check on him, and Faith asks if he's even still alive. And Charlene says that this hunk of a man is really still just a kid. Hopefully he's not dead. And Chris says, on the plus side, the impact blew out the forest fire that you created. Soon John wakes back up into his larger self asking what happened, and Charlene tells him, you jumped out of a helicopter. We all did. It was wicked! After helping John up, the 5 of them make their way to the closest street and they stop a person for their car and they head over to the motel to recover. Peter tells everyone that he's sorry, but he's happy that everyone's okay. He steps out thinking about how if he was high right now, things would be so much easier. But back when they were in New Orleans, he was so close to just leaving and getting his high off pills. Why didn't he? Chris comes out telling Peter that everyone wants to see him, and Peter thinks that it was because of her that he didn't get those pills. She's helping him fight his addiction. When Peter goes in, he sees everyone wearing Harbinger Foundation clothes, and he thinks to himself that he will do what he can for these people. He wasn't there for Joe because he was high on pills being stupid, but these people, he'll be there for them now. And that is the second volume of the Harbinger Foundation storyline. It is awesome. I'm loving it. Hope you guys are enjoying it too. After this, it either goes into Volume 3 or it goes into Harbinger Wars. It gets a little confusing how Volume 3 and 4 and Harbinger Wars all tie together, but if you watch Harbinger Wars, you'll get a better understanding. We're going to bring you Volume 3 and 4, so eventually you'll understand how this all ties together. Hope you guys enjoyed. Follow me on Twitter at Comicstorian and Instagram at Comicstorian, and I'll see you next time right here.